Well, Skyward Sword HD has arrived on Nintendo Switch approximately 10 years after it debuted on the Wii, and it's arrived with significant improvements to the motion controls. Plus, it's a great opportunity for those to catch up on the canonical start of the Legend of Zelda series. Well, Skyward Sword definitely has its flaws, but I think it's a must-play for any Zelda fan out there. Well, the original Skyward Sword was a product of its era when it first came out, so the Nintendo Wii console was definitely one of the most successful consoles ever produced, and millions of units were in homes all over the world. And Nintendo really invested in motion controls, and in Skyward Sword they were front and centre. So this one felt more than a gimmick, like swinging a tennis racket in Wii Sports. This was a full-on mainline Zelda entry, following on from the mildly successful Twilight Princess. Players could now wield a sword in their hands with the Wiimote, and perhaps for the first time really understand what it felt like to be Link holding the Master Sword in your hands. And Skyward Sword has some fantastic dungeon designs, but the motion controls and other aspects of the game too put off many fans, leading to a major rethink of the franchise, which would later spawn one of the most successful games of all time with Breath of the Wild in 2017. Well, fast forward to 2021 and Skyward Sword HD feels like a vast improvement over the original. The motion controls, they're still there if you want them in the updated Joy-Cons attached to the Nintendo Switch. However, Nintendo has also implemented button controls, so both options are still viable, and there's nothing like sitting back with a Pro Controller and having an adventure around Hyrule. So Nintendo has been very deliberate with its marketing for Skyward Sword HD. The quality of life improvements have been front and centre to the marketing campaign, and some of the marketing has also crept into Breath of the Wild 2 teasers, with a shot from their new trailer shown off at E3 2021 demonstrating clear inspiration from Skyward Sword, with Link diving down from above. And Skyward Sword HD's release feels like a deliberate move from Nintendo, and perhaps they are admitting that many people didn't play Skyward Sword and want to present an opportunity to fans to go back and enjoy this lesser played Legend of Zelda adventure. And Nintendo has that massive install base for the Nintendo Switch, and hopefully with a few tweaks they could introduce a whole new audience to what is a solid Zelda story. So I played Skyward Sword primarily with the button controls, only breaking out this mode to test out the new motion controls, and I would say buttons are the way to go with this entry, and Nintendo has made some interesting improvements to the controls overall. It's not perfect by any means, but I think they're more than adequate and allow me to enjoy Link's adventure in Hyrule without having to worry too much about waggling a Joy-Con or Wiimote in the air. So one of the freedoms presented with Skyward Sword is you could swing that Wiimote, and that would be translated to the screen with different directional swipes. You can swipe horizontally, vertically, diagonally, and also stab with the sword too. And these motions have been translated to the right thumbstick on the Pro Controller or Joy-Con, and they work fairly well. You know, it's not the most comfortable control scheme I've ever used for an action-adventure game, but to be honest, it will do, and I do think it's an upgrade over the motion controls of the original. So normally, the camera controls are reserved for the right thumbstick, and this is still there with a tactical use of the L button. You know, sometimes I'd end up getting my sword out when I didn't want to, as it feels so natural just to use the right thumbstick for the camera, but after a few hours it becomes second nature, and you can stop worrying about the controls and focus on the great story in the game. So this is where it all began for The Legend of Zelda, and if you check out the timeline for the Zelda series, then canonically it is the first one in the story. So you play as Link, or whatever you decide to name the main character, in a place called Skyloft. So this is a small town in the clouds on floating islands, and in the first hour or so in the game you take part in a coming of age ceremony where you and your bird Mount are taking part in a competition to become a Knight of Skyloft. Zelda is there too, and she's taken on the role of the Maiden, where the reward for winning the ceremony also comes with some alone time with Zelda, and she's going to offer you up a gift in the form of a glider, which nods to the future of one of the main tools of Breath of the Wild. Groose, the standard rival character, and his gang, they're determined to stop you from succeeding in the event by kidnapping your bird. However, you manage to get him back and win the day, and of course the attention of Zelda herself. Well, Zelda has been having visions of an evil below the clouds, and after the ceremony you're both flying on your bird mounts, when all of a sudden a cyclone knocks you both off your birds. Well, Zelda is lost below the clouds on the surface, and Link wakes up back in his bed in Skyloft. He's safe for now, but he's got Zelda's worried father at the foot of his bed, asking where his daughter is. Well, Link then travels to the statue of the Maiden, an ancient statue in the Legend of Skyloft, and is presented as the hero. As Zelda's father gives you an ancient tablet and you're equipped with a sword, then it's time to set off on your adventure below the clouds. So Skyward Sword is the last game of the traditional Zelda model, which started back years ago with games like Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time. So Link starts out with only a few tools in his arsenal, then as you progress through the game you pick up a series of weapons and tools throughout the dungeons and slowly get more powerful over time as you take down the big bosses at the end of the dungeons. By the time Skyward Sword came out, this formula for Legend of Zelda had become a little bit tired, leading to the team rethinking what a Legend of Zelda game could be. Although the formula is somewhat tired, it doesn't mean that Skyward Sword is a bad Zelda entry at all. It's actually really good, and I think that many people when they first played the game found it tough to get through the motion controls and the new way of playing Zelda, but scratch under the surface of the game and there's a very solid Zelda title here, and it really holds up. Breath of the Wild really switched things up in 2017 by removing the dungeons and the linear path to the game. So rather than provide you the tools and items as you progress through the series of dungeons, we all got our tools on the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild, then we could forge our own path towards the end of the adventure by any means necessary and by any path that we decided on. The dungeons were replaced with smaller, more plentiful shrines, and Nintendo injected a sense of exploration not found since the original Legend of Zelda on the NES. Skyward Sword does feel on rails for the majority of the game, but there are elements of freedom here too. So Skyloft acts as your central hub world, from which you can discover new areas on the map below, then you dive there, solve the puzzles, beat the dungeon, and often opening up new areas with the improved tools and items. The controls are definitely improved in the game. There's also other quality of life improvements too. So in the original, you would get an item notification all the time explaining what something was whenever you pick something up. For example, you pick up a rupee, and then you get that same explanation each time you picked up another rupee, which really was just unnecessary. But you can now skip the cutscenes and dialogue, which is perfect if you die and don't want to see the same time-consuming dialogue you've been through before. There's also support for fast travel, although this is locked behind the amiibo, which to be honest is a little bit cheeky of Nintendo. The quality of life improvements really work and make the overall experience of Skyward Sword HD much better than the original. I really prefer sitting back with the controller in my hands and having an adventure, and the world of video games definitely has moved on from deliberate motion controls of the Wii Motion Plus era, and the motion controls are much more subtle these days in games, if there are any there at all. There are deeper issues though with Skyward Sword that the quality of life improvements can't fix. For example, the map is very big, but it feels overall quite empty. It's unfair to compare this to Breath of the Wild, but in that game it felt like a little adventure was around every corner. Skyward Sword in comparison feels quite lonely, and does give you some clues as to why the team decided to switch up the whole nature of the Zelda series. The quest structure in Skyward Sword is also a little of its era, which amounts to gathering a bunch of items or doing a series of mundane tasks just to get to the next dungeon or the next area. You know, Skyward Sword definitely could do with a little bit of pruning of these unnecessary fetch quests, because when Skyward Sword is good, it's great. So rather than be a 50-hour game, I think it would have performed much better at something like 25 to 30 hours with cutting some of that filler content. But minor bloat issues aside, Skyward Sword is a good Zelda entry and better than many of the reports since its original release. You know, the pattern of critical analysis of Skyward Sword is rather interesting. You know, when it first came out it scored really well, but then I think the reception on the title cooled not too long after the release. I don't think many people went back to play it purely because of the controls, and since Breath of the Wild came out and that became one of the best games ever released, there's almost less reason to go back to the original Skyward Sword. So Skyward Sword HD is a worthwhile investment on Nintendo Switch for Zelda fans. It's not a dramatic remake like Link's Awakening, but it's a good time capsule of a video game displaying the nature of Nintendo gaming at the period of release. Skyward Sword thematically also sets up the franchise, acting as a prequel to many of the games that came before it, plus there's potential links to Breath of the Wild 2, and I think Nintendo really knows what they're doing when it comes to telling a good story, and this release at this time with Link dramatically skydiving in Breath of the Wild 2 trailer probably isn't a coincidence, so I would recommend picking it up on Nintendo Switch and checking it out. There's nothing more relaxing and delightful than an adventure in Hyrule, and Skyward Sword does a great job. So Skyward Sword HD is available on Nintendo Switch and was originally released on the 16th of July 2021. Well, that is it for my review of The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD on Nintendo Switch, and as always, thank you so much for watching. hit that subscribe button down below and subscribe to This Week in Video Games. If you want to join the community, check out the Discord link in the description, or you can follow me on Twitter at TWIFEG Podcast. If you enjoyed this video and found it useful, liking and sharing the video would really help me out. Otherwise, check out the other videos on the channel. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.